These ensure that environmental and social issues are evaluated in decision-making, help assess and reduce the risks, and provide a mechanism for consultation and discussion and disclosure of information. So for instance, it ensures actions are not to be used for conversion of natural forests, that actions should not reduce biodiversity or harm local people. So more about this in the text from the Framework Convention Ad Hoc Working Group on Long-Term Cooperation will be forthcoming. So be sure to watch out when you're looking at forest inventories and projects for unintended consequences and what you might want to include in your forest inventories in order to catch this kind of issue. Now, in particular, I might mention ecotourism. I mean, ecotourism is often touted as a way to bring in funding to reduce deforestation or degradation locally, and yet, if not implemented carefully, ecotourism can result in increased greenhouse gas emissions from travel, especially international air travel. Now, I don't mean to be controversial because I've been told already this is a very controversial topic, and nor do I mean to sound like an advocate for anything but objectivity. So please let us objectively consider all possible environmental damage, including actions contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Keeping, say, 2 to 5 hectares of forest from being cut and converted in exchange for a plane-load of international tourists is not necessarily a net improvement in emissions. Moving on to the next point. Inventories give information about what exists on the landscape. So what we need to know is how this compares to some type of baseline, maybe called business as usual, maybe it's discussed as reference emission levels or reference levels. The discussion is ongoing, and the reason we need to know these is so that we may know how much our actions and changing behavior have contributed to reducing emissions, which I'm generally calling here by the name carbon benefits. So this means extra analysis is needed beyond just the collection of the data and the data analysis from the inventory and monitoring system. So some thought should be given about what this analysis, this baseline carbon benefits estimate is going to need in terms of information, because these information needs could be met through adding to the inventory design. So baselines or reference levels are something else to keep in mind. Finally, climate resilience is discussed increasingly in projects. As we see more extreme weather variability, how might the project design need to be modified to be less affected by any extremes? And does the inventory need to be designed differently to ensure that estimates are relatively precise? Something else to think about, the inventory design might be augmented to cost-effectively provide this additional information to inform adaptation needs. So moving on to the conclusions here, which are, or a look to the future. Some things to consider: total project accounting, beyond a carbon, looking at multiple benefits, looking across the landscape, not just the forests, results-based actions, technology centers, and perhaps their role. So I'm going to talk a little about each of these. There seems to be, in total project accounting, an increasing number of funding agencies looking at implementation from a sustainability point of view. And so they look at total project accounting. That is, we do a project, let's look at every activity we have to do about that project and include the greenhouse gas emissions or reduction in greenhouse gas emissions so that we have, say, a greenhouse gas emissions footprint for the entire project. This allows for improving project design to increase the benefits of the project. Consumers and investors and therefore boards of directors are increasingly wanting to see this kind of information. So I'm expecting to see more of this in the future. Beyond carbon and onto multiple benefits, there's a recognition that managing forests and lands for one benefit affects other environmental benefits, and there are synergies and there are trade-offs. increasing discussion about cost effectiveness of not only inventorying for carbon, but also about whether additional information can be collected cost effectively for measuring other benefits, such as for biodiversity or productivity improvements in the case of land degradation, are certainly very relevant things to think about. Now, in addition to the multiple benefits from forest management, there are complexities to defining forests, and other lands can also provide global environmental benefit. So, in particular, if it is non-forest land, it can be reforested to forest or peatlands that are kept from being drained. So the small plots that are used to define forest for National Forest Inventory may reveal something different at a project level. You know, one small field plot may represent a 3,000 hectare area for National Forest Inventories, but a 3,000 hectare area is basically the area, more than the area of a small project. And some intensive survey of those areas may show, this, say 3,000 hectare area, may show that a large part of that area is non-forest. So you have to think about forest and non-forest and looking across the landscape instead of just concentrating on forests can help you catch these different issues with the different land uses. More agriculture activities can also be intermixed with what might be defined as forests, or we could double crop with trees. So you'll have trees on the upper story and then an understory crop or even a crop between the rows. And as landscapes become more urban, forest cover may coexist with housing or even with streets. So as inventories are designed, how to handle these complex landscapes, benefits, and increasing informational needs should be considered. And when we look across the landscape, the third bullet, that looking across the landscape and designing inventory for that rather than just for forest inventories is certainly something that one needs to think about. Results-based action, well, we have continued assertion by the Framework Convention on Climate Change that results-based action should be fully measured, reported, and verified, and that's what everyone's talking about at all sorts of meetings. So keep up to date and try to see what the latest is on that. And finally, within the Framework Convention on Climate Change, there's a technology mechanism which has come up with the idea of climate technology centers and networks. And the JEF has provided funding for some regional pilot centers, and there will be more to come. Now, some of this may be related to REDD+ capacity building. Not all of it is, but some of it could be. And I can't say I'm aware of any particular opportunities, but my experience has been to ask and see what you can make happen, and it's really surprising what may be available. So, my last slide, this has been kind of a long talk. It's unfortunate I'm traveling at the same time of this workshop because I was willing to be available and take phone calls, and I prefer to respond quickly to your comments. But please do email me at lheath@fs.fed.us if you have a question or comment. Also, I have a Skype account, but to use it I have to go home due to current security issues at my work site. So you can always email me and we can set up a time to chat that way if you have some extensive item that you want to talk about. So thank you all very much for your attention, and I hope you're enjoying the workshop, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a good day.
Thank you, Virtual Linda.
Before the next presentation, I think it's probably time to stand up. So if folks don't mind, one thing I would like to do is just sort of give 3 cheers for our assistants in the room who are doing a great job and they've been really helpful. So thank you. And if everyone wouldn't mind coming up front, if you would take a group photo,
okay.
I would really love that. And give everyone a chance to stand up.
Everybody's so quiet. No one hand out the flash drives, because I know that's no one handles pretty good. Yeah. Hello. Don't do that. Oh. Yep, she's in the hall. That's good. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Cheese. Cheese. One more for luck. Okay. Kimchi. Good? Okay, thank you. Oh. Places. And I do want to reiterate, Linda really does want to be of assistance, so you can contact her, or if you have questions, you can get them through me, but she's absolutely available and willing to answer any questions. As well, if you like it. Oh, yes. I can't give you anything that doesn't have all kinds of, there's just a lot of really helpful content on here that should be a good starting point for you. Let's listen. Yes. There's a lot of, the IPCC guidance is on there, the presentations are on there, Jeff reports are on there. I just sort of threw on anything I thought might be useful. And the really important thing to look for is there's a list of websites, and I'll have links, and those. Did I miss anyone? Sure. Went the wrong way. Not lunchtime. So I'd hope to have this
It's recorded as well, only work out technologically. But Pradeep has been working on them. Guyana, as part of Red Readiness, has had to build an MRV system from the ground up. And I had met another person, Darshini, who's now with the Environmental Protection Agency in Guyana, but who was with the Forestry Commission at the time I met her, actually at an in-field carbon training workshop where I taught the soils portion. And she was describing some of their inventory challenges that I found to be amazing. There's just such rugged and remote terrain. Guyana is largely forested. It's just really hard to get to places, and so they're not really sure what sort of species they have. In some areas, they're just so inaccessible, and so it was really a challenge to try to think of how they could do their inventory. And so I had asked her, if she could give us some of her perspective on what it's like to build the system from the ground up when you don't have one in place. And what she has sent us is a presentation that was given as part of the MRV process. And a lot of it's really technical, so I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of the slides, but I'll go through them all and hit on a few points. And then I had asked her some specific questions that I thought would be perhaps most of interest to this audience, and I have her answers as to how they dealt with some of those challenges. So if we could start that other slideshow. So this was a big capacity building effort, and there were a couple of key points in here. Some of them, again, this is for a different audience, and there's a lot of detail that we don't necessarily need, but I think there's some important points that come out of it, particularly in regard to capacity building. And one of the things included on your flash drive was I did pull their latest MRV report off their website. And so that's there, and you can look at all the detail, and you can see their roadmap and what they have worked on so far. So this was sort of, they had an initial workshop, and they've come out with all of their, Guyana does have a low carbon development strategy, and they're very involved in the REDD+ process. So that's a little complicated, and again, the Forestry Commission website has a lot of detail on that.
Is that presentation included in the drive?
This one is not on the drive because I did not specifically get her permission to distribute it. I think it's extremely similar to the one that's on the Forestry Commission's website. And the report in particular details, they've taken a very remote sensing heavy approach, and the report, which is on your flash drive, does detail everything that was done with the mapping and the different data layers that were used, so that might be of particular interest to you. So a little bit of the background, they've engaged on this program because they do have a lot of intact forest, and so as part of the REDD+ program, this is really a great opportunity to reduce emissions. And some of the challenges actually that they've come into is not only not really having an inventory system, but you'll see this on several of the slides. A lot of these mechanisms are still under negotiation. The particulars of the REDD+ programs aren't really set yet, and that's one of the important lessons she wanted to communicate, is that you can in fact move forward anyway. So this is the requirements that they're working on there. Again, we said MRV is an important component of a lot of things. Certainly, it's a huge component of REDD+. So they had to work out everything, and remember I have mentioned that no matter what your purposes are, this IPCC guidance is always a good roadmap, and you can see that they want to remain consistent with this guidance. But it's also important that things be appropriate for your country. And so this was one of their key lessons too, is that you have to make sure that you're developing something appropriate for where you are in your situations. So they really wanted to work on their capacity gap, trying to figure out how they're going to address that. Because again, there was not a lot of mapping, and they've got some very inaccessible terrain that poses quite a few challenges. So they took a roadmap approach, they had workshops, they sort of developed their plan, and then they're going to have interim targets and sort of constantly reevaluate throughout, and then some more intense projects where there's sort of demonstration projects to try and discover what works and doesn't work. And they really wanted to do a lot of cooperation across agencies and cooperation with other governments as well. So they had a few areas where they really identified they needed a lot of work. And one was, again, the MRV. And as Linda mentioned, there's one set of measurements for your national reporting, and then when you've got your projects, you sort of need that sub-national system. Guyana really wanted to engage with the international community, and they really wanted to sort of make sure they were all working together nationally. And that was one of the challenges I asked her about, was finding those initial data sets. And they had a lot of different information, but it was not in one system. So the agencies that handled mining would have one data layer, and the Forestry Commission had another, and things weren't integrated. So it took a lot of work just to identify what they had and be able to pull that together and to try to start to make a plan and make a roadmap. This is one of those things I'm not going to spend too much time on, but one of the important things I thought on here was that they wanted to improve their national capacity, and you'll see that as a common theme. We talked a little bit about capacity building. And if you look at, I think point number 5 really struck me.